Karen was furious, her face flushed with rage as she blocked my car in the driveway, unaware of the badge concealed in my pocket. Little did she know, I wasn't just any homeowner. I was the county building inspector, and her illegal renovations were about to catch up with her in the most spectacular way. I glanced down at my watch, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel as the seconds ticked by. I was already late for my next appointment, and this nosy neighbor had the nerve to park her oversized SUV right in the middle of my driveway. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, my eyes narrowing as I approached the woman who was currently ranting and raving about some perceived slight. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I'm going to have to ask you to move your vehicle. I have an important appointment I need to get to." Karen spun around, her eyes widening as she took in my appearance. "Who you think you are, barging in and demanding I move my car?" she snapped, planting her hands firmly on her hips. "This is my property, and I'll park where I please." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes, instead reaching into my pocket and producing my official county inspector badge. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to insist, ma'am. You see, I'm the county building inspector, and I have a scheduled appointment to inspect your property." The color drained from Karen's face as she stared at the badge, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But I haven't done anything wrong," she stammered, her bravado quickly evaporating. "That's what we're here to find out," I replied, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "Now, if you be so kind as to move your vehicle, we can get this inspection underway." Karen hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around as if searching for a way out of the situation. Finally, with a defeated sigh, she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, slowly backing out of the driveway. As she passed by, I couldn't help but notice the nervous tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. I knew in that moment that she was hiding something, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. "Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "I'll be sure to let the county know how helpful you've been." Karen shot me a withering glare, but said nothing as she pulled away, leaving me alone in the driveway. I waited until her car had disappeared around the corner before turning my attention to the house, my eyes scanning the exterior for any signs of illegal renovations or additions. This was going to be an interesting day, I thought to myself as I made my way to the front door, my mind racing with the possibilities of what I might find. As I approached the front door, I couldn't help but notice the subtle signs of recent renovations, the freshly painted trim, the new landscaping, the gleam of recently installed windows. A sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, and I knew I was about to uncover something big. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. After a moment, the door swung open to reveal a middle-aged woman with a strained smile plastered across her face. "Good afternoon, ma'am," I said, flashing my badge. "I'm from the county building department, and I'm here to conduct a routine inspection of your property." Karen's eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw a flash of genuine panic in her expression. "Oh, of course, please come in," she said, her voice slightly shaky. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." I stepped inside, my gaze sweeping over the interior of the house. Everything seemed to be in order, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. "So, how long have you lived here, ma'am?" I asked, casually making my way through the living room. "Oh, just a few years," Karen replied, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her shirt. "We've been doing some renovations, you see. Just trying to make the place feel more like home." "I see," I said, nodding. "And have you obtained the necessary permits for those renovations?" Karen's face fell, and she averted her gaze. "Well, I'm not sure, to be honest. My husband usually handles all that sort of thing." I could feel the tension in the room thickening, and I knew I was close to uncovering something big. "Well then, why don't you show me around, and we can take a look at the work you've done?" Karen hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly nodded. Of course, right this way. As she led me through the house, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes: the new kitchen cabinets, the expanded master bathroom, the addition of a second story. All of it was clearly unpermitted, and I could feel the excitement building within me. This was going to be a good day, I thought to myself as I followed Karen up the stairs, my mind already racing with the possibilities of what I might find. As Karen led me through the newly added second story, my eyes darted around, taking in every detail. The workmanship was sloppy, with uneven floors and crooked walls, and I could see the telltale signs of structural issues that would have required proper permits and inspections. "So, what do you think?" Karen asked, her voice trembling slightly. I paused, running my hand along the wall as I pretended to inspect the work. "Well, it certainly looks like you've been busy," I said, my tone neutral. "But I'll need to take a closer look to ensure everything is up to code." Karen's face paled, and she began to fidget nervously. "Up to code? I'm sure it is. My husband hired the best contractors, you know." I raised an eyebrow, a sardonic smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "Is that so? Well, let's take a look, shall we?" I proceeded to systematically inspect each room, jotting down notes in my pad as I went. The more I uncovered, the more concerned I became. The electrical work was shoddy, the plumbing was a mess, and the structural integrity of the addition was dangerously compromised. As I finished my inspection, I turned to Karen, my expression grave. "Ma'am, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your renovations have been done without the proper permits, and in many cases, they don't meet basic safety standards. I'm going to have to issue a cease and desist order, and you'll need to have a licensed contractor come in and bring everything up to code." Karen's face crumpled, and she let out a strangled sob. But this is my home. We've put so much work into it. You can't just shut it down." I shook my head, my own expression hardening. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the law is the law. You've left me no choice." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "I would strongly suggest you start making the necessary repairs, or this could escalate into a much more serious situation. I'll be back in a week to check on your progress." Without another word, I turned and made my way back downstairs, my mind racing with the implications of what I had uncovered. This was going to be a fight, and I was more than ready for it. As I stepped outside, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Karen had made a big mistake in blocking my driveway, and now she was about to pay the price. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized just how much trouble she was in. As I made my way back to my car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, and I knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. I pulled out my phone and quickly dialed the number for the county building department, my fingers tapping impatiently against the steering wheel as I waited for the call to connect. "This is Jared from the county inspector's office," I said, my voice sharp and authoritative. "I need you to pull the records for the property at 123 Oak Street immediately. There are some serious code violations that need to be addressed." The person on the other end of the line must have heard the urgency in my voice, because they didn't waste any time. Within minutes, I had the full history of the property in front of me, and what I saw only confirmed my suspicions. Karen and her husband had been doing a series of illegal renovations for years, all without the proper permits or inspections. They had expanded the master bedroom, added a second story, and even built a detached garage, all without so much as a single piece of paperwork to show for it. I let out a low whistle, shaking my head in disbelief. This was going to be a major headache, but it was also an opportunity. If I played my cards right, I could not only shut down their illegal operations, but also leverage the situation to my own advantage. As I sat there, my mind racing with possibilities, I caught sight of Karen's SUV pulling back into the driveway. I tensed, watching as she hurried up the front steps and disappeared inside the house. I knew I needed to act quickly, before she had a chance to cover her tracks. I took a deep breath, then stepped out of the car, making my way back to the front door. I rang the bell, and a moment later, Karen's face reappeared, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm afraid I have some more bad news, ma'am," I said, my tone grave. "The county has reviewed the records for your property, and it appears that your renovations have been done without the proper permits. I'm going to have to issue a stop work order, effective immediately." Karen's face crumpled, and she let out a strangled sob. But how did you find out?" "My husband said everything was taken care of." I shook my head, my expression hardening. "I'm afraid your husband was mistaken, ma'am. The law is clear, and you're in violation. I'm going to need you to cease all work on the property until you've obtained the necessary permits and inspections." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "I would strongly suggest you start making the necessary arrangements, ma'am. The consequences of ignoring this order could be severe." Without another word, I turned and made my way back to my car, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. This was just the beginning, and I couldn't wait to see how the rest of the drama would unfold. As I drove away from Karen's house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The look of sheer panic on her face had been priceless, and I knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, quickly dialing the number for my boss at the county building department. "Hey, it's Jared," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I've got a situation at 123 Oak Street that's going to need your attention. Looks like we got some major code violations, and the homeowners have been doing a lot of unpermitted work." My boss listened intently, his brow furrowing as I filled him in on the details. "Dan," he muttered, "this could get ugly." "All right, I'll put together a team, and we'll head over there first thing in the morning. In the meantime, I want you to keep an eye on the place and make sure they don't try to cover their tracks." "You got it," I replied, already formulating a plan in my mind. "I'll be in touch." I hung up the phone and pulled into the driveway of my own home, my mind racing with possibilities. This was the kind of situation that could make or break a career, and I was determined to come out on top. As I stepped through the front door, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. I knew that the next few days were going to be intense, but I was ready for the challenge. I quickly changed out of my work clothes and into a more casual outfit, then grabbed a snack from the kitchen and headed out to my car. I had some surveillance to do, and I wanted to make sure I was well prepared. As I drove back to Karen's house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. I knew that she was going to be on high alert, and I wanted to make sure I was one step ahead of her. I parked a few houses down, my eyes trained on the front of the property. It wasn't long before I saw Karen emerge, her face set in a determined expression. She hurried to her car and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. I waited a few minutes, then followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that this was a risky move, but I also knew that I couldn't afford to let her get away. As I followed her through the winding streets, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. This was the kind of high-stakes chase that I lived for, and I was determined to come out on top. I knew that the next few days were going to be a battle of wits, but I was ready for the challenge. Karen might have thought she could outsmart me, but she was about to learn a valuable lesson. You don't mess with the county inspector. As I followed Karen's car through the winding streets, my heart pounded in my chest. I knew I was taking a big risk by tailing her, but the stakes were too high to just let her get away. I kept a safe distance, my eyes trained on the road ahead. Karen seemed oblivious to my presence, her focus entirely on her destination. I couldn't help but wonder where she was headed. Was she going to try and cover her tracks, or was she planning something even more sinister? After a few twists and turns, Karen pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript office building. I quickly found a spot a few rows away, my eyes never leaving her as she hurried inside. I waited a few minutes, then followed her, my footsteps light and my senses on high alert. As I pushed open the door, I was greeted by a maze of cubicles and the hum of computers. I scanned the room, trying to catch a glimpse of Karen, but she had seemingly vanished. I moved forward cautiously, my eyes darting from one corner to the next. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted a door at the back of the office, partially hidden by a cluttered supply closet. I made my way over, my heart pounding in my chest, and pressed my ear against the door. Muffled voices drifted through, and I strained to make out what they were saying. I could hear Karen's distinct tone, laced with a hint of desperation, and another voice, deep and authoritative. Slowly, I pushed the door open, my eyes widening as I took in the scene before me. Karen was standing in the middle of the room, her hands clenched into fists, while a well-dressed man sat behind a large oak desk, his expression calm and unreadable. "I'm telling you, we need to do something about this inspector," Karen was saying, her voice shaking with emotion. "He's ruining everything we've worked for." The man leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Sinclair, but we can't afford to draw any more attention to this situation. We'll need to handle this delicately." My breath caught in my throat as I realized who I was dealing with. This wasn't just a random office, it was the headquarters of a powerful local construction company, and they were clearly in cahoots with Karen and her husband. I stepped forward, my badge held high. "I'm afraid I can't let this go any further," I said, my voice authoritative and unwavering. Karen and the man both spun around, their faces registering shock and fear. "What the hell are you doing here?" Karen shrieked, her eyes wild. I held up a hand, silencing her. "I'm here to put a stop to your illegal activities, Mrs. Sinclair. And it looks like I've stumbled upon an even bigger conspiracy." The man behind the desk rose to his feet, his expression hardening. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave this room, Mr. Inspector," he said, his voice low and menacing. I tensed, my hand instinctively moving towards the taser in my pocket. This was going to be a fight, and I was more than ready for it. The tension in the room was palpable as I stared down the man behind the desk, my hand gripping the taser in my pocket. I knew I was in over my head, but I also knew that I couldn't back down. Too much was at stake. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You're going to stop this illegal operation, or I'm going to shut it down myself." The man let out a low chuckle, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "You really have no idea what you're up against, do you, Mr. Inspector?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Karen stepped forward, her face twisted with rage. "We've worked too hard to let some nosy bureaucrat ruin everything," she spat. "You're going to stay out of our business, or else." I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I stared them down, my mind racing with possibilities. I knew that I needed to tread carefully, but I also knew that I couldn't back down. "I'm afraid I can't do that," I said, my voice hard. "You've been breaking the law for years, and I'm here to put a stop to it. If you try to interfere, I'll have no choice but to take you both into custody." The man behind the desk leaned forward, his expression darkening. "You really think you can take us on, Mr. Inspector?" he said, his voice low and menacing. "We have powerful friends, and we're not afraid to use them." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I refused to let it show. "I don't care who you know," I said, my voice steady. "The law is the law, and I'm here to enforce it." The man let out a harsh laugh, then reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a sleek black handgun. "I'm afraid the law isn't going to be much help to you today, Mr. Inspector," he said, his finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to slow down as I watched the gun being raised, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that I needed to act fast, but I also knew that I had to be careful. One wrong move, and it could all be over. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I lunged forward, my hand reaching for the taser in my pocket. The man fired, the gunshot echoing through the room, but I managed to dodge the bullet, slamming into him with all my strength. The two of us tumbled to the ground, the gun clattering to the floor as we grappled for control. Karen let out a terrified scream, her eyes wide with panic. I could feel the man's hands closing around my throat, his grip like iron, but I refused to give in. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to pull the taser free and pressed it against his shoulder, the electricity surging through his body. The man let out a strangled cry and went limp, his grip on my throat loosening. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest, and turned to face Karen, the taser still clutched in my hand. "It's over, Karen," I said, my voice hoarse. "You and your husband are going to prison for a very long time." Karen's face went pale as she realized the gravity of the situation. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way to escape. I took a step closer, my grip on the taser tightening. "It's over, Karen. Your little construction scheme is done. The county has all the evidence they need to put you and your husband away for a very long time." She seemed to deflate, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "How did you find out?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's just say you made a mistake when you blocked my driveway earlier today," I replied, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of my mouth. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Karen let out a frustrated sigh, her eyes darting towards the unconscious man on the floor. "And him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's going down with you," I said, my tone harsh. "This wasn't just about a few illegal renovations. You and your husband were in bed with a corrupt construction company, using your connections to get away with all kinds of shady activities." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't even try it, Karen. I have all the evidence I need to bury you both. The only thing you can do now is cooperate and hope for a lighter sentence." Karen's shoulders slumped in defeat, and she nodded slowly. "All right, fine," she muttered. "What do you want me to do?" I pulled out my phone and quickly dialed the number for the county police department. "I want you to come with me, Karen," I said, my voice firm. "It's time to face the music." As the police arrived and took Karen and the construction company executive into custody, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This had been a long and arduous battle, but in the end, justice had prevailed. As I watched the scene unfold, I couldn't help but reflect on the events that had led me to this point. It had all started with a simple driveway blocking incident, but it had quickly spiraled into something much bigger. A web of corruption and deceit that had been years in the making. But in the end, the good guys had won. And as I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the work that I had done. This was what being a county inspector was all about, fighting for the rule of law and holding those who sought to abuse the system accountable. As I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. Who would have thought that a simple driveway blocking incident would lead to such a dramatic and satisfying conclusion?